Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another episode of Storytime with the Villagers. And today we are going through the Atlantic Ocean. And today's storytime is about a Nigerian man who stayed for 60 hours trapped under the Atlantic Ocean without any supporting gears, no clothes, no oxygen cylinders, almost naked in freezing and salty water, partly being eaten by fish, deep under the stormy and wavy Atlantic Ocean. But despite all that, this man survived. Now, it is 5 a.m. rainy morning on a Sunday, May 26th, 2013. We have a boat. And for those who understand boats, this type of a boat is specifically a tugboat. And before we go further, let me first make you understand what a tugboat is. A tugboat is a marine boat or vessel which maneuvers other boats or vessels by pushing or pulling them with direct contact or a tow line. So these boats typically tug ships in circumstances whereby these big ships cannot or they should not move by their own power. So this happens in places like crowded harbors, narrow canals, and so on. So in other words, a tugboat is like a rescue boat, or just like on the road, we have like breakdown towing vehicles. So this tugboat, which was nicknamed the Jascon 4, is on the black waters of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Nigeria. And as usual, this boat is on a dutiful mission, which is a very vital mission. And the mission is to secure a massive several 100-foot long oil tanker ship packed to the brim with petrol that had just been extracted from the nearby Chevron oil platform. And actually in Nigeria, this is a $3 billion industry that extracts around 238 gallons of crude oil from deep down the ocean every year in Nigeria. So this massive oil tanker, which was off the coast of Nigeria, was being thrown about by massive ocean swells, crashing waves, battering rainstorms, and there was no end in sight in this whole saga. So this small ultra-powerful Jascon 4, the tugboat, had been called in to fix a line into this big oil tanker ship and keep it from capsizing. So this big ship that was supposed to be rescued had started releasing thousands of gallons of petroleum into the ocean, and everyone was watching helplessly in horror. And this is when Mother Nature proved that a 1,000-ton ship packed with $1 million fuel cannot match the full fury of Mother Nature in this earth. Now, we have a man called Harrison Oken. Oken is a 29-year-old Nigerian citizen by then, and he was a cook in this rescue boat called the Jascon 4. But one unexpected situation here is that Oken was not going to work in this marine company anyway, because being a university graduate, catering was just an additional side skill, and because of that, he happened to be a very excellent cook even off the ships. So just like any other young man in Nigeria, who is trying to make ends meet, Oken goes to a marine company to look for work. So when he reaches there, he finds that actually the human resource manager in that company is his uncle. So his uncle refuses to give him a job and tells him that I'm your uncle now. I can't give you a job now. Kindly try elsewhere. I can't give you a job here now. Try elsewhere now. So before leaving outside the gate, Oken finds a security guard, and he asks the security guard that, can you drop my CV? The security guard says, okay, sure, I can do that. Why not? Give me your CV, and I go and I drop it. But before Oken leaving the CV to the security guard, Oken speaks a few words that, God, I know that we shall shame the devil, and you will always give me double. And I pray that this same CV brings me back to this same place. So Oken left the CV with the security guard, and he left. 2 weeks after, he gets a job in that same company when his uncle is actually on leave. So by the time Okene's uncle came back from the leave, Okene is already in the company with good recommendation from his seniors, including the captain, that Okene is one of the best cooks in the company. And this surprised the uncle that he couldn't chase Okene away. Moral of the story, there is something always amiss with relatives. So another usual day, of course, and as an employee, it was just another morning in the life of a cook on board the Jascon 4. So this kind of rescue mission is not new to Okene, because he went on missions like this all the time, knowing that yes, they do experience dangerous situations, high seas, and there are also constant risk of being blown up while in their equipment. Also, there is also painful gasoline explosion. It was just part of the job description. So as a cook, as long as his pounded yam fufu came out in the right taste, and those on board of the Jascon 4 were very happy with his cooking prowess, especially the captain, to him everything was going to be on the right path as far as his line of duty in the kitchen is done. And remember, most of these boat workers or the crew members lived in the boat or ship due to the nature of the work. And at times they could be transferred from one ship to the other and so on. So on this day, Okene was not supposed to work. And being a Sunday, it was supposed to be his day off. But that day, he was supposed to work on behalf of another cook who was actually not feeling very well that day. So later he found that he was anyway going to work in the Jascon 4 boat for 1 more week. So Okene wakes up and he tries to stabilize himself, and before going to the morning trip on board of the Jascon 4. So before getting ready to put on the breakfast for the 11 crew members on board the Jascon 4 tugboat, and still in his underwear, the ship's cook, Okene, is still feeling sleepy, and also probably he was a little seasick, and most likely just feeling like the way a lot of people feel when they have to wake up early at 5 a.m. in the morning, especially being a Sunday, the day that you are not even supposed to work. So in this situation though, he was completely unaware that he was only 5 minutes away from being abruptly thrown face first into a horrific death trap in a crucial and unusual dungeon, which was going to be no other place than the bottom of the horrific Atlantic Ocean. So before I take you to event after event account on how this accident happened and how he miraculously came to survive, this is to let you know that Okene's God and Okene's surviving star was still with him even years before coming to work as a cook at the ocean. Because one, this is a guy who had seen a lot and gone through a lot and had already seen and understood the good, the bad, the ugly in his normal life back at home. And Okene had almost lost all his friends because of one reason or the other, and miraculously he finds himself to be the one still surviving. So this is long even before him coming to work in the ocean. In other words, Okene grew up in a very rough zone in Nigeria. So Okene has been a surviving man all through by grace of God. So, and one of the major situations in which he openly survived death is when he was coming from a night market one day, from helping his mother to sell groceries. And on his street where he lived, there was a heavy robbery attack in which a heavy shootout was going on between the police and the robbers. So having the grocery basket in his hands and only a torch, Okene finds himself in the middle of the shootout. Now in this situation, the police were thinking that Okene was a robber while trying to shoot at him. Okene, on the other hand, was there super scared, not moving, not knowing what to do. Bullets were passing him left and right, but luckily, no bullet touched him. But as he was now proceeding home, along the streets going home, after the bullets have actually calmed down, the police ran after him, caught him, and asked him to identify himself. And after that, the police told him that you are very lucky. we were aiming at you, thinking that you were a robber. You could be dead by now. Now, back to the main story. As Okene finally gets up and goes to the kitchen, of course, the kitchen in the boat, it is called a galley. Then he switches on the hot plate. Then he goes to the toilet and finds 4 of his colleagues, the other guys. They were there brushing their teeth at the sink near the toilet. Then he says that, okay, let me first go to the toilet. Then when I am done, I will come back and I also brush my teeth. So no sooner had Okene sat on that toilet seat like this, a ridiculously huge wave smashed hard on the side of the Jascon 4. But Okene said that, this is normal because this is what we usually experience while we are rolling all the time. But again, another wave came, spraying the sheet of water across the rain-hammered deck, cracking the piece of the hull, almost flipping the Jascon 4 tugboat. That is when suddenly Okene heard a buzzing sound. Then the voice announcing that the boat is about to capsize. The boat is about to capsize. But still, Okene didn't say anything. He just said that, the captain is fond of doing that. Maybe he's just doing his routine warning talks. The next thing that happens, the boat finally flips upside down. Jesus! The toilet seat where Okene was seated is up and Okene is down. Even part of the toilet seat cracked and fell on Okene's head and injured him. And immediately, the place went dark. And remember, in all the places to be, you are in the ship, and this ship flips upside down and begins to capsize and sink to the bottom of the ocean, while you have been sitting on the toilet seat, 5 a.m. in the morning. I'm telling you, this is one of the worst experiences that Okene had. And this is when it finally rang in Okene's mind that, maybe this is how I was supposed to die. And this is my day. So Okene immediately opened the door in an attempt to get out of the toilet. It was completely a terrifying and horrifying situation that you possibly can imagine. So he finally gets out of the toilet. That is when he suddenly saw a reflection of someone's phone. So he decided to follow that direction to where that phone direction was coming from. And when he reached there, he heard it is as if 3 of his colleagues were in the corridor. It is called a hallway. They were trying to struggle from there. They were specifically trying to seal off something called the water tidal. It is some kind of escape route or door. So Okene joins them at the back so that they can try together to put back the water tidal. But no sooner, freezing water came from nowhere and swallowed them all. So this made Okene to quickly swim back from where they were struggling with the doors, back inside so that he can catch some more breath. But as he was swimming back, the force of water pushed him into the engineer's cabin. When he entered the engineer's cabin like this, the door got closed. It was so gruesome to watch. And that is when Harrison Oken immediately learned that all the 3 sailors might have died on impact. So, but there was no time to think, Okene was still trapped below the decks and blocked by the deadly rushing water. And the only thing that remained was him to fight against the mighty current of water flooding into the passageway. So the water made him to muscle through the ship's officers' cabins. Then from there, the water continued to rush in, forcing Okene back into the bathroom, which was next to the captain's room. And finally, it hurled him up against the wall, as the entire tugboat, on the other hand, was continuously fighting the waves, taking in an unsustainable amount of water, terrifyingly rolling, and then soon it slowly began to sink towards the bottom of the ocean. But as the boat was sinking, remember, it was upside down. Okene could hear people shouting different sounds from different directions, and at this time the floor was up and the roof was down. So as the boat was slowly sinking towards the bottom of the sea, Okene was still trying different ways so that he could probably save himself. First, he tried to open the water tidal. The water tidal was locked and tight. He went to the vent and he had to break the iron in the vent and finally opened the door. But still, he was hearing the voices of his colleagues shouting and shouting and shouting. But Okene was equally fighting for his life by forging a way that he could possibly get out of the vessel. But as he is still there, still struggling, soon the shouting voices of his colleague started going off one after the other. And that is when thereafter he saw that the only light remaining was a solar light. And this enabled him to see a floating life jacket. And on top of the life jacket, there was a breathing tube. So he immediately put that breathing tube in his mouth and he had to swim back inside the water, inside the boat, and try again to locate where the water tidal was again. But when he finally found the water tidal again, it was locked and the place was dark. And because the solar light wasn't so much powerful, this is when he said that, it is time that I apply more wisdom. If not, death is beckoning. So Okene had to get back out of the water occupied area, back up to catch some breath before going back again to fight the water tidal to open. Though this was not an easy ordeal because inside there it was dark and he could easily lose weight. So now what does he do? Okene grabs the floating rags and makes a long rope out of those rags. Then he chained the ropes from where the water tidal was back to the place where there was a small space where he could go and breathe. Remember, the water tidal was the only possible exit that could allow him escape death by getting out of that vessel. So in this case, he used this rope as a chain to show him the way back up to where he could breathe and back again to go and fight the water tidal to open. And he made these movements back and forth to and fro the water tidal more than 10 times. Now Okene tried and tried until he got tired. This is when he reached the stage whereby he realized that when he stood up, water could swallow him. So he had to pluck the fibers from the boat, and luckily he realized that there was something like a wardrobe under him. And this is when he had to push it and put it on top of the fiber, and he sat on the wardrobe. Though at this time, half of his body was now inside the water, while the other half, including the head, was out of the water. Now here comes a major problem. The fish came and started eating his legs. Jesus! This is when he had no choice but now to pray to God and leave luck to play its card. Now here we have a situation whereby Okene is now caught in a dark place but with some kind of breathable air hanging on the base of the overturned boat and his head above the water, breathing normally. Sweating balls as the Jascon 4 was sinking further and further into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. And finally, it came to rest as the ocean floor after what seemed to be a long journey from up to the floor of the sea. So at this time, Okene was now buried alive in a water grave. Jesus! He is now in the tugboat, Jascon 4, stuck in his underwear, in total darkness and a tiny bubble of air, locked in an upside down ship resting on the ocean floor, 100 feet below the frozen depths of the Atlantic Ocean. So Okene decided to fight the water using his strength to hold his head above the water, maintaining his breathing and preserve his oxygen. His entire mostly naked body was completely exposed into freezing cold salt water with no food, no light, no drinkable water, limited oxygen, and no hope of any timely rescue. So Okene, who happened to be a sole survivor of the crew, leaves everything to God, but yet still stubbornly and resolutely refused to give up for any reason ever. He was still going to fight this out, hold on, and fight for his life until the waters of the Atlantic or the excessive amount of carbon dioxide finally kills him and lays him to rest with the rest of the crew. But for now, he was not going to give up yet. So Okene is still there and he feels extremely hungry. Then he looks up and he feels like there is a bag somewhere, and this bag is having a snack and Coca-Cola. But since his mouth had peeled off down the throat because of staying long in salty water, he had to eat this snack anyway, little by little, while sipping the Coca-Cola. And soon after that little tiny light that he had, the solar light, soon went off and the whole place was dark.
Oh my God!
So the place was so quiet to the extent that he could hear any small thing around him. Even up on the surface, he could hear the vessels which were passing. Even much later, when some rescuers were passing around searching, he could hear them, but was not rescued anytime sooner. The only solution was him to stay calm. Now, on the other side, back on the land, the Nigerian rescue crews had already received a mayday call for rescue from the JASCON 4 earlier on. But because the storm was so rapid, there was no chance of mounting a rescue operation on time. Even when the weather cleared later in that day, there still was a relatively noticeable problem that yes, the ship was upside down, but the problem was that this needed someone brave enough to attempt swimming inside the vessel, which was like 9 stories down underwater. And at that place, even the highly trained professional scuba divers aren't recommended to remain in such depths, which was around 30 meters or 100 feet deep for more than 20 minutes at a time. So it is simply so dangerous even to the rescue swimmers. So because of these challenges, Harrison Oken, a ship's cook only in his boxers, stayed down there under the Atlantic Ocean for 60 hours, starving, freezing, with salt water peeling off his skin, tongue and body. His body was pruning up. He was only holding on an overturned boat. But still, Okene refused to give up. So Okene tried very many things while under the water, while trying to rescue himself, because he was even trying to avoid a host of dangerous things under there, like dangerous fish to eat him up. At some time, he carried any wooden object that he could feel or locate around, then fashioned some kind of small raft that he used to float. And this was enough to keep his body warm and to keep his body out of water, and also rest his muscles in the legs and arms. So as Okene is still under there under the water, the only sounds that could reach his ears were his own breath slowly killing him, and also hearing the horrific sounds of the dead crew members being eaten up by fish and other unseen aquatic creatures. Jesus! Remember, earlier on, when Okene was swimming back and forth to the vessel in an attempt to open the water tidal so that he can escape, he could touch and feel the bodies of his colleague, and you could feel that they were swollen, and that is when he realized that probably his colleagues must have died. This scenario was both terrifying and horrific. So Okene stayed under the Atlantic Ocean for the next 3 days, and eventually a team of South African rescue divers were brought in to check the wreckage and salvage what they could. So these people had to swim deep inside the ocean with full gear and flashlight, and as a result, these divers found the bodies of 10 crew members. Then they headed to the ship to investigate. So back in the ship wreckage, Okene is there quiet. Soon he hears someone jumping inside the water. Then soon after, he sees a flashlight. It was the first time in 3 days that Okene was seeing light. But when he swam towards where the flashlight was, there was nothing. Again, that person had disappeared. So I think the divers had gone away knowing that the work is over. So Okene, knowing that he was working on the last of his oxygen that he had, he left off from his makeshift raft that he was sitting on, and he had to dive inside the black water, and he had to rip a metallic pipe that was around the sink. He came up and he started hitting the ceiling as hard as he could, trying to call the divers before they abandoned him to die from there. So at that same time, he had to float at that very place that he had seen the light. Soon after, he saw again water bubbling through the water tidal, and also he saw again a reflection of light again, and there was also some metallic beating there. Good enough, it was again the divers who had come back. Now this is when Okene said that, wow, finally it is time to be rescued. So Okene immediately had to swim after the diver and tapped him as they were swimming by. Remember, these rescuers were brought from South Africa and they had already rescued 10 bodies and were convinced that there was no other body remaining. So by being tapped by Okene, this could make this South African dude to freak the hell out of him, thinking that he was being mauled by something from underwater genies or some evil spirits, because they did not expect anything alive there at that time. And the truth of the matter is that when Okene tapped this dude, he nearly jumped out of his wetsuit. Yeah! So Okene was lucky that he was not greeted by a stab on his neck at that time. But thereafter, everything was calm. So the diver asked Okene, "Are you the only one there?" Okene said yes. "Are you sure?" He said yes now. Now Okene later was given water to drink, but he was not interested with drinking water anyway, as you know, because what he was thinking there was how to get out of that place and go back home. At that point, Okene had reached a point where he was now struggling to breathe because oxygen was becoming more and more limited. And Okene was only doing two things: crying and thanking God. Because before, he used to think that God is only in heaven, but later, at that time is when he was realizing that God can be around us and he lives around us. So at 7:30 p.m. on May 28, 2013, 62 hours after his boat flipped, Harrison Oken, exhausted, starving, swollen legs, water that had entered his body, his tummy was big, swollen body partly eaten by fish, dangerously dehydrated and unable to stand by himself. Okene was equipped with a rebreather, helmet, oxygen aid, life jacket, and he had to use his last ounces of strength to swim out of the wreckage. But his journey was not over yet. Okene had been down there for so long and he had sucked so much nitrogen into his lungs. So bringing him straight to the surface would have killed him immediately. So instead, he needed to spend more 60 hours in the decompression chamber. In simple terms, a decompression chamber is some sort of regulator that could help Okene come back to normalcy. So one thing you should know is that Harrison Okene at one time happened to cook for those divers, and when they came to rescue him, most of those divers happened to recognize him. Though he was greeted with the most shocking news that he has ever had. He was told that he was the only survivor while the rest of the crew members were all dead. So some of the sad stories from some of the fallen crew members' families was that one of the crew members had a wife who had just given birth to a baby boy. But unfortunately, he never got back home alive to see his wife and son. Another crew member had just been married for 25 years, but the wife was not giving birth. So they had adopted a girl child, educated her, gotten for her a good job, and also the girl got married. But by the time this guy was dying, the wife had given birth to twins, and suddenly he did not live long to enjoy life with his twins. So during the tests inside the compression chamber, medics were baffled and confused and said that Okene is not a normal human being, because they argued that a normal human being cannot spend all those days under the Atlantic Ocean with all those foreign gases, the nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and so on, and then come back up to the surface when you are normal, because you are supposed to have some kind of complication. But surprisingly, Oken was perfectly okay. So Harrison Oken, having gone through a worst nightmare, was finally released to the hospital on June 1st, 2013, only just to be cleared to go home later. So his 62-hour ordeal, trapped underwater in a bathroom 100 feet below the ocean's surface, is believed to be the longest any human being has ever survived after being trapped underwater. So thereafter, Oken finally arrives back at home, just to find a big crowd of people waiting for him. He is again whisked away to International SOS Medical Center to spend some time there. But soon after, Oken refused to stay in the hospital, calls his brother to come and take him home. At home, he finally meets his wife. He starts crying uncontrollably. Then the wife also, on the other hand, is also crying with tears of joy while rolling on the ground, praising God. So people happens to come from all corners of the country, including all corners of the neighborhood, including relatives. So they celebrate life. But again, one problem happens. Oken starts having trauma, whereby sometimes when he's in the house, he feels like the whole house is sinking. So sometimes he could even hold his wife's shoulder as he runs out of the house. This happened several times until psychological medical experts had to come for assessment, in which they concluded that Oken had to change the environment, including keeping his mind busy, in which he did. So thereafter, Oken went back to the same company and started to work again. But this time, he was working in the office on land, not in water. But later, on January 4th, 2014, Oken went to work in Gambia. And in Gambia, most hotels are built at the beach. So while at the beach, he found again himself occasionally swimming on the ocean side. Even sometimes he could swim to far places, then back. So even sometimes he could swim in the hotel swimming pools. And because of this, Oken again, he had become to get used to the waters. So later on, Oken decides now he wants to go into diving as a profession. His brother tries to convince him not to do that, but with no success. So in June 2015, Oken leaves the country and goes for diving lessons, diving course in Europe. The instructor there in Europe happens to notice him, and he fears to train him out of phobia that this guy might drown and get trapped again under the water. So out of fear, the instructor again transfers Oken to another instructor to train him. So Oken is put in the water full of tank and also in the ocean to swim. But during that time, a crowd of people came to surround him to look at him, because he had become some sort of celebrity because of the previous events that happened in the ocean during that accident. So Oken eventually passed everything, and after 2 months in Europe, he went back to Nigeria. And in 2018, during his second training again in Europe, he became the first person to get into 50 meters depth under the ocean while still a trainee. But back in Nigeria again, Oken got a job as an offshore diver and comfortably going into the seabed, rescuing things like doing things like installation and many other things. He can dive in the dark as early as 2 a.m. in the morning and in places which is infested even by sharks. And this is something that he is happy about, and he loves his job. Now, Oken again lived to enjoy his new profession and life around and under the waters. And he cannot really explain how he survived with that ocean wreck ordeal. He only says that it was just the mercy and an act of God. And as of now, Harrison Oken is an IMCA Class 2 commercial air diver from International Marine Contractors Association, and he can work in any part of this world with good pay.
This man!
Another sad story from Nigeria with a happy ending. And kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more exclusive and detailed information like this. You cannot get information like this anywhere apart from here. And thank you for subscribing. Till next time, bye bye.